So that's my warning to be careful what you say because it's all subject to Cora. Okay. And it's 1:03, so we'll start out. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, especially this many meetings in. We still have a really good group, which is kind of the driver for our discussion Darren and Frank are going to lead off in. About the permanency of this group, but just a couple housekeeping items here. Again, we are recording this, so we will send a link out. Jason could not join us today. He is on vacation. Good for him. And we noticed that there are a number of people who have kind of left the group, and we want to try to re-engage. So if you know somebody who's participating in the group earlier and has stopped engaging because, frankly, we had good rain in the spring, we would like everybody to re-engage because we know that what we're seeing is not necessarily equitable from Front Range to West Slope. Colorado is still in severe drought, and so I think we need to continue to talk, and we never know what next year is going to bring. So we're going to have a little change up in how we open these meetings. Traditionally, we go through and everybody do an introduction and where they're at with their stages and such, but I think for most part, we know everybody on this group, or we know the utilities that are involved here. So what we want to do instead for first 10 minutes is simply have a member update. So if you are either new to this group, or if you are, or if your utility or municipality has made a change in its plan or its drought response, if you do me a favor and raise your hand quickly, we'll call on you. We'll let you tell us what, either who you are and what your changes were. Yes, Dave.
Dave Lightheart, General Manager, Evergreen Metro District. Zoe Loftus sat in the last meeting, so as I was unable to attend, so I'll be here hopefully from the future on. EMD did change our drought response to no drought at this point. Our stream flows in Bear Creek are still over 50 CFS, which far surpasses anything we got close to last year and is significantly higher than our response plan dictates. So at least through the irrigation season, we should be good to go.
Okay, thank you. Are you relying upon direct flows or do you have storage as well?
Our raw water supply storage is Evergreen Lake.
Okay.
So that's all we got.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody new or anybody who's had a change in their?
This is Nathan Elder with Denver Water. I'm filling in for Jason Finehout. We've had a bit of a reorganization. He's now in my group, in the raw water supply group at Denver Water. And I think I'll be replacing Asta Parker as Deputy Drought Coordinator for Denver Water.
Okay. Well, good to know. Yeah, we're all kind of, I don't know, you had a couple quick changes there at Denver Water. I think Dave Benner we knew was going to, retire at some point.
Yep.
But there's several other ones. So the only thing consistent with water is change. So. Anybody else? Okay. Well, excellent. Thank you. So as I said, we've had a number of these meetings, and I think they've been very successful and very beneficial to all of us. Otherwise, I don't think we'd all be here. It's nice to get this group together, but up till now, it's been what I call coffee clatch. Jason's done a great job of running it, but Jason has, other things going on with his work. So we're trying to find a little bit of, I guess we want to see what it is you folks want to do in the future. And so Darren with Northern has kind of offered to lead us in a discussion about how do we take this group forward, and it's this really, I want an interactive dialogue. I want to know what it is you want from this group and how do you see us responding here. So Darren, take away.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Greg. And hey, everyone. It's great to see you all. Looks like we have about 31 people in this meeting. So it's great to know that we're still engaged and kind of coming back to this meeting. But yeah, as Greg said, we're just kind of looking forward and trying to figure out, yeah, what it is that we can do with this group that really kind of will sustain kind of engagement within this group, regardless of whether there's an active drought or not. And then, but also just provide value. So really understanding kind of what it is that, like Greg said, that we all hope to get out of this. And yeah, so, and also just kind of another kind of housekeeping issue too. So I know, as Nathan mentioned, there's been a little bit of a reorg. So I think that Jason's stepping away from the kind of the admin side of this group. So I'm happy to take his place. I know I have some big shoes to fill. He's been doing a great job. So you'll be probably for the future, you'll probably be receiving a lot more emails from me regarding this meeting and kind of setting those things up in the future. So for kind of for this approach and kind of this discussion, I was trying to hope to build kind of more like a guided discussion, like Greg said, really hoping to engage as many people as possible to really get as much feedback and input as we can get on really the future of the group. So and looks like Greg already started it off, read my mind. With using the chat function for additional discussion. So I think actually I'm going to be using the chat function pretty heavily during this conversation to kind of share links or share questions and just kind of guide the discussion. So if you don't already have it open, I would just recommend go ahead and open up the chat now. And so, as we kind of go through this discussion, if you have any connection issues or if you're feeling a little shy, feel free to, add your thoughts in there to the chat. And I'll make sure to kind of call out those points and that input and make sure that we kind of all are on the same page and kind of don't miss anybody's input. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to kind of post the questions into the chat box to kind of open up the discussion and kind of go from there. I have like 10 different questions to kind of guide discussion around. But there's 5 of those questions actually has a survey attached to them, where we're hoping to kind of get a more kind of full engagement there, just in case, not everyone has a chance to participate or let their thoughts be known. We figured that survey should help to capture everyone's input, everyone's ideas, everyone's thoughts, and then help to kind of direct the future and kind of the organization, everything like that. So before we kind of launch in, are there any other questions kind of about that, kind of about the process here? Good, excellent, okay. So far, so good. So kind of the first thing that I wanted to really just kind of talk about and kind of put on all of your radars is, so just in thinking of kind of the future of this group and really kind of what the purpose really is, we kind of did like we created a little bit of a purpose statement and that I'm putting into the chat right now, and I'll of course go ahead and share it with you all. But really, what we had seen as kind of the purpose of this group so far, and can really kind of inform our direction in the future, is to share resources, whether those are plans, operating rules, restrictions, or restriction levels, and so on and so forth. As well as best practices, case studies, and material, really to inform a more consistent and collaborative approach to communicating drought to water users and customers really throughout Colorado. I know that our group here is not just made up of front range water providers. So we really want to make sure that collaboration and consistency is really kind of enshrined here. And then also kind of during water shortage events, share any plan activations and thoughts for the present or the future. So I guess, kind of to open up the discussion here is this, I really just kind of want to get your thoughts on kind of what this kind of purpose statement means to you. Is it too wide in focus? Is it too narrow? Are we missing anything? Or should we add anything, or is there maybe the scope is too broad and we really need to kind of focus it in? So I'll just kind of stop blabbering on and let you all kind of chime in and just kind of hear what your thoughts are on this purpose and kind of moving forward. All right, so Katie Helm had a great suggestion that we maybe use a different word instead of customers. Does anybody have anything else to kind of add to that? And then maybe we can kind of talk about what other terms we could use other than customers.
We just strike that term.
Oh, I think you remuted yourself, Frank. Sorry, could you repeat yourself, Frank? No, okay, no.
Hey, are we allowed to talk to you or just chat?
Oh no, please talk.
I agree with Katie that we use customer too, because customers are, who pays the bill, but we have tons of people, myself included, who I'm not an official customer of my own water utility because I live in a condo, so I never see the bill. So I do think that when we are talking to our folks to try and like reduce water use and affect that, we are really trying to talk to customers who actually have control over that and have control specifically over their irrigation systems, which again, I would have very little control over that. So I want to just say the public, but I also think as water utilities, we know that actually we're trying to talk to who pays the bill and controls the water use. So I kind of feel like that's the debate, and I don't know where and I can go either way: public, community, customers.
I lean towards community because, I mean, honestly, if you're talking about drought, it impacts everybody, regardless. So, I mean, it is a broader message. I have less concern about customers. I'm more concerned about terms like citizen. Yeah, because and there's some political connotation with that as well. But I would vote for customers at this point. Anybody?
Greg Lewis here.
Yeah.
I think I would echo the same thing on narrowing down the word as using community instead. I have a couple of districts and they're different from one another in that one is fully residential and then the other one is just fully commercial. And I get 30,000 people in my commercial district, and I'm pretty sure only, maybe 1,000 reside in the district, and the other 29,000 come out of the district. So my point is that when we reach to the community, we're saying, hey, the moment you open that faucet and the moment you open that irrigation system, just think about conservation. Doesn't matter if you're here or outside of the district. And it seems to me that the target here is a statewide awareness. So I think that will hit the guy that's just coming across state lines just to visit the state and realize, oh goodness gracious, these guys are very mindful of water usage, and we should just jump on that wagon too.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that, yeah, maybe there are a couple different options here that we can definitely kind of, wordsmith a little bit later. I think, Francie, did I see that your hand was up?
Yes, I was looking, looking at the statement, it seems to be very focused about being during droughts or water shortage events. And I think we've talked as a group a little bit about the benefit of having consistent messaging so that, and being strategic about kind of consistent, like you should always be conserving water or preparing for, so that when there is like a major drought or a major water shortage event, that it's kind of like the next, it's just like one little more thing instead of like a big change. So I wonder if there's a benefit for this group existing kind of outside, kind of that second sentence specifically calls out during water shortage events, kind of outside that frame.
And to that point, the approach to communicating drought to customers, and you had one of the points made early on, especially by Diane, was that drought is almost a permanent state now, it seems. So do we move over to the verification discussion? Do we just say water shortage events? I don't know if you can call it an event. We're always in perpetual water shortage. We have a couple of years of reprise occasionally, but I think we're always in water shortage. So do we find another term that carries us through so that we don't say we're only active during a declared drought, during a perceived drought? Do we continue to message even in times, should we get back in times of plenty?
Yeah, Greg, thank you so much for adding that. That actually is a key element, I think, of a future conversation that we'll definitely have about kind of the terms we use to really discuss drought or really communicate what water shortage means to the community. I also just wanted to point out that Julia also added another comment in the dialogue or in the chat box. This seems like a very broad and challenging goal. Are there resources behind orchestrating all of these efforts? Or is the statement more informal about just connecting, sharing, sending docs messages back and forth, et cetera? Or will we use a current organization to orchestrate WECO, Colorado Waterwise, et cetera? Or is this a new group that includes a cross section of water resources, SMEs, drought SMEs, and conservation SMEs? That is a fantastic question. And yeah, I mean, I think that is a very existential, like broader question about kind of this group. So I guess, does anyone have kind of any thoughts on kind of that statement by Julia? I mean, should we be creating these resources, or should we really be kind of orchestrating kind of through a partner organization?
It was
It may have been an accidental discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's a question, because I mean, there are a lot of organizations out there. Sometimes I think we find ourselves committed or overcommitted to some of these. Are we duplicating anything that already exists, or is this truly unique? As I look at the representation in all these meetings, I'm not certain I see 100% common thread that this group meets that need and this group can help support. There are support areas. We talked about Colorado Waterwise and things like that. But as far as the function of what this group has become over the past couple of months, is this unique enough that we need to have our own structure? We need to have our own charter. We need to formalize what we're doing here.
Right. It's kind of the question of, to what extent are we formalizing kind of everything that we're doing, and kind of putting more, I don't know, rigid kind of structure around it, or just more or less continue kind of what we've been doing, which is more of like an exchange of ideas, information, and resources.
And then put in chat, the thing that makes this group most meaningful to me is that it is primarily water providers. Well, what I like about this is that the folks representing the water providers they're not all conservation people. They're not all public relations people, not all water resources people. We cut through a large gamut of the organizations. So we're getting some interesting perspectives in all this. So that goes to my point. I have not been able to find an organization that meets this function that we can simply come under the umbrella of to maintain this. And I see some head shaking, nodding. Anybody want to chime in?
Sure, I'll jump in. I would agree. and when you get to the idea of aridification, can I say that word? It feels like the communication is less about drought and more about the idea that water is going to become more and more precious to us over time. For a lot of us participating, you're finding you've kind of clawed in some smaller entities that don't necessarily have dedicated um, drought communication or even water communication in their worlds. And so the ability to understand where everyone is and hopefully get to a common language is really important to Golden in particular. And we have found value in this group and would continue to participate. I don't know how formal it needs to be, but I think it needs to be regular. And it would be nice if we had a common language and then found our way to a feedback loop where um, post irrigation season we can have conversations about what messaging worked and what conversations worked with our communities.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I would have to absolutely agree with you, and I think you're maybe also reading my mind a little bit because there's several other questions that will kind of speak to everything you're just talking about too. So I guess maybe because there is a little bit of the discussion kind of is bleeding a little bit into some of the other conversations or discussions and questions we have down the road, maybe we can kind of jump back to a couple of the comments more about kind of the general purpose statement, and then we can kind of focus in more on exactly what that structure kind of looks like, and then maybe what those activities might actually entail. But I think that's great that we kind of teed up that conversation already. So I saw that I think one thing we kind of skipped over is Laura Wing said she suggested communicate drought and water efficient practices. And Laura, do you mean communicating that to the community, to end water users or end users?
I meant just that statement. It was early on in the discussion about the statement, and I was going off on a tangent. So, but just not just about drought, but water efficiency practices I thought was important to include in the statement. That's all.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that also kind of harkens back a little bit to maybe what Francie was saying, or Frankie was saying, Francie, sorry, was saying that, yeah, and just to bring kind of your point into as well, Francie, that your points were more around when we are active, should it be more of a normal year-long thing or only in extreme events, however that is defined. And I mean, I know that I'm kind of the opinion that this probably should be more of a more permanent year-long thing where we're discussing, and it doesn't always have to be necessarily on drought if we're not necessarily, kind of like we've already been talking about, you know, there is the aridification, that long-term process. So I think that is absolutely, and then what Frank said, yeah, can we attest that drought is now permanent as aridification, or is it, you know, still temporal? I mean, I think that yeah, I think most of us can kind of agree, I think, from kind of some of the comments, that this is more of a long-term, you know, we're kind of in this. So maybe we should kind of broaden the language to not necessarily specifically focus on drought, and really include kind of more general water efficiency messaging as well. Would everyone kind of maybe agree to that, like almost broadening the scope to not just necessarily drought and aridification, but also kind of water efficiency as a whole within kind of how it impacts or really is impacted by drought and aridification?
To me, those mitigation efforts are, frankly, that's the ask sometimes for our customers. You know, here's the what, we're in drought or we're in aridification. Now, what can you do? That's the action item. So I agree with that. And frankly, today's point that, you know, everything, and frankly, like so many, utilities has water, they've been doing water conservation on their own, but they can certainly update their information. It becomes more challenging. And nice thing is there are some tools out there, both from Colorado WaterWise that we can incorporate in here, as well as Rocky Mountain Section 8 WWA's Conservation Committee. So there are two resources we can bring in on an as-needed basis to help provide us with additional resources on a tangential basis. But if we can keep, to me, the conversation on this group is how do we as utilities respond? And those are the actions, frankly, that are not included quite often in those other groups. So that's really why I like this. I like everybody talking about it. Early on, somebody said that they liked knowing where everybody was at. That's helpful. It's helpful for me as I talk to my elected officials and talk to my executive management and saying, well, you understand that, frankly, Brighton, Castle Rock, and Evergreen and Golden, they're all doing these things. And it helps add validation for some of my messaging as well.
In support of what Greg's saying, conservation is an ongoing, always promoted effort for customers to be smart about their water use, regardless of drought. Whereas this is more of a situation when the supply is outside of our normal management expectations. So I don't think we want to mix the two together too closely, since there are people focused on the regular communication of conservation and the development of tools for that, specifically WaterWise and the AWWA session. I think of this group as one that's focused on when we are in the severe drought stages that are affecting people's water supply beyond their regular operations and practices. The two are related, but they should remain distinctly separate, I think.
Know when and how to use them as tools. To me, that's kind of the way I look at it. This is the broader policy discussion, a higher level philosophical discussion. And then when you need tools, we have these resources available to us.
It's like we're always healthy. It's always a good idea to be healthy when you're eating. And now we're talking about more of a stricter diet when,
Right.
you kind of cut back. So I think of it as two parallel and supportive messages, if we can find the right metaphor here.
I feel like you framed that so nicely, Frank, because when we start talking about removing the words drought and shortage, I feel like we're becoming very closely aligned with the goals of Colorado WaterWise. So then we are talking about doubling efforts. So I definitely echo everything that you just said.
Yeah, I think that's a really important kind of consideration to move forward. And certainly we don't want to, duplicate any efforts. And we really want to make kind of, like we've said a little bit earlier, is, we want to create the most value for the members of this group, with which to then communicate with, their customers and just kind of create that more consistency. So I don't want to kind of belabor that conversation or that discussion too terribly much. So I would kind of like to move on a little bit to kind of that next discussion question, which we've already kind of had that discussion for the next question. So I think that we can take this feedback and just kind of reform that statement to kind of include all this feedback. And maybe kind of workshop it a little bit more, kind of outside the meeting, or maybe even at the next meeting if need be. So kind of the next, or I guess the real question here is really the format of these meetings. Is what is going to be the most valuable and the most engaging in terms of kind of creating those work products or those consistent messages and sharing all that information. So really, kind of the question that I think, and it's kind of like an A or B question here, or A or B answer. But I'm just going to add that to the chat here. But really the question is, should we continue the same format of, this meeting where, every month to month and a half we get together and we kind of share these our drought restrictions, our updates, because I know in the chat, and we've talked about that has been valuable, sharing that information, understanding kind of what other water providers and utilities kind of close to each other are doing, and just that's great for messaging and kind of planning out what those messages can be. Or should we move kind of more towards kind of what we've already been kind of talking about here, more of a kind of like a project focused work group format where there's really more or less focus during the meeting on sharing those updates. We can certainly have those updates, maybe collect them in a survey format kind of before the meeting or after the meeting and just share that with everyone so that we're all still very much on the same page as to what all water utilities are moving towards with drought restrictions when we're in a water shortage event. And I just realized that I never actually shared that question. But really, I think like that kind of that second part, kind of moving towards that kind of that project or action oriented. Yeah, already got that. We already got some input there, moving towards more of that action oriented. And thank you, Aaron, for liking the survey concept to collect initial information to kind of spur that discussion. But I guess this is really just kind of a general existential, like, is having the drought restriction updates so valuable to take up 45 minutes during these meetings, understanding that we're all very busy and we could just as easily share them. And then that would kind of give more time to talk about one, learn from, say, AWWA or Colorado WaterWise, kind of bring in more information. And then we could kind of create more kind of tasks or projects to kind of work towards a more consistent and collaborative messaging. All right, looks like we got some comments coming in. So Diane said that not valuable enough for each meeting, but changes like how today started are good. Okay, so Diane, sorry, do you mean that that like 45 minutes talking about drought restriction updates is not valuable enough for each meeting?
Sorry, I'm still eating my lunch.
Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah, I mean that like the first time, you know, if this were something that's going to meet year round in like March or April, we'd sort of say, where's everybody at? And then similar to what Mario put in, we could just log that in a big spreadsheet chart, whatever. And then each month kind of be like same. Anyone have, we don't have to say same, just anybody have an update, which is what you guys kicked it off with today. Hey, who's new or who's changed their status? But we have to understand from year to year who's doing what.
Perfect. Excellent. Any other big comments or maybe some pushback or alternative ideas of like even a different direction that we could take?
I'll make another play to not call things restrictions and just have people start saying their regular rules, regulations, whatever it is, because even the stories that come out in the paper and keep talking about restrictions, like rules and regulations are also restrictions. We just have to get that is normal for Colorado. I would love to see that come out of this group. What is normal for Colorado is that there are rules about how you use water, because it's just silly to waste it in the middle of the day. You can still use the water, just not at certain times and not every day, stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, that's one of my soapboxes.
Perfect. That's what I like to hear too, because I think that I think I mentioned earlier too, because when Greg was kind of talking about that shared language, the shared vocabulary, that is kind of one of the things we had planned to talk about today. I'm not sure if we will have enough time to kind of get there, but certainly, Diane, I think that I would love to engage you on that topic and that subject, but that will be a conversation slightly down the road here today. So I guess it seems from the comments that we're seeing in the chat box and kind of what people are saying on camera, that it does seem like there is a little bit more of a I guess, consensus kind of towards that B option. So like moving kind of away from the every meeting having the round robin updates, and more for kind of a space for information sharing, project work, and developing kind of resources, and more of that consistent project. Great. Well, just to kind of make sure that everyone's voices are really kind of heard, even if they're not comfortable sharing it, what I hope to do, and please let me know if this doesn't work, but I'm going to share a link to a little survey that I put together. And this is just a single question. So I just shared that link to the survey. And it's just the, yeah, A, B, or C, other. But it's the same general question. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes, if everyone just could kind of go into this, open the link and just kind of add your thought. And then we can maybe take a look at the results. So just to kind of reiterate, the question really is, in terms of the overall direction of the group, should we continue in the same format as before, or move to a more action-oriented format? All right. All right, so we're at 18. And let me see if I can just go ahead and share my screen really quickly so I can show. All right, can everyone see? Of course, it changed my Teams look, but can everyone kind of see the results coming in?
And if you're not familiar in Teams, you can actually click or use Control and use your mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit on the presentation.
See, I'm not seeing that, but I can definitely zoom in. All right, so I think that's probably enough time for everyone to have gotten the chance to respond. So yeah, it looks like the consensus here is to move towards more of an action-oriented group. And we can, in the next question, we can kind of talk about kind of what those activities might be. But I'm also curious to list out these other responses. And, oh good, these are anonymous. Just trying to look down for any of the other recommendations. So yeah, hybrid, a little bit of both. Continue as we are until it gets a little bit more dire. Project based upon Colorado River impact, solutions, messages, collaboration with West Slope. Love that. That's perfect for our next question. And both, yeah. So it looks like there is a pretty major consensus that we should continue at least, or at least kind of a hybrid version, but at least, kind of move towards that more like action-oriented approach. All right. So, so kind of to that point of like where we're headed and kind of what we can do. I guess the question really is, what are some of those potential products or end results that we can really strive for that are realistic given our busy schedules and this group, and that would be very valuable kind of for us. And just a quick note on kind of how we could organize and actually create any of these activities. I think what we would like to do is maybe create like ad hoc committees to work on individual projects as assigned, and then just ask for volunteers to join those committees and kind of drive that those products to get forward. And that would kind of be instead of creating more kind of a formal, long-standing committee structure that you know, might scare people away. We don't want to kind of over formalize this group, but we certainly want to, you know, get it a little organized so that we're kind of moving towards something. So just you know, a couple of things that we had listed out earlier. I'm gonna post in the chat box right here. So these are just some of the ideas that we talked about. So kind of to Greg, and I know Diane, you're dying to talk about this too, but like the shared communication terms will kind of help a more consistent kind of approach to messaging. And, you know, this would be recommended, of course, because we know that certainly we can't necessarily prescribe everyone to have to use these terms or anything like that. It could be additional joint press releases, and we can kind of talk about what topics might be covered under those press releases. Maybe even just kind of developing more consolidated reports of those kind of drought restrictions or drought updates to inform the municipal water task force, or even the drought task force. And then I don't know if many of you were in the last municipal water impact task force meeting, but we were also kind of talking about the option of kind of collecting stories. And I think this also, I am really bad at actually sharing what I'm talking about. I'm sorry about that in the chat. So a kind of a fourth option would be collecting stories about the impacts of drought, say on maybe individual like farmers, just on the agriculture industry, or impacts in the angling industry or the rafting industry. And just kind of like be kind of boots on the ground, kind of collecting those stories that we can share either through media or just kind of share to the Municipal Water Task Force. And then just generally kind of regional collaboration on like shared messages, whether that's, you know, templates, social media posts, or key talking points. And I know that Colorado Waterwise and Live Like You Love It already has those templates and social media posts, and they are awesome. So certainly wouldn't want to, you know, duplicate those efforts. But if there's any way that we can maybe even assist or offer assistance in kind of creating or even just kind of providing feedback on things like that. So really kind of the question, I guess, is, are there any additional kind of work products that we could kind of work on together? And I know that Julia had posted so a project focused on Colorado River, so contingency planning, messages, stories, supply alternatives, etc., would be valuable. I have to agree with that. So yeah, so any and all kind of ideas are welcome. So please, yeah, please unmute yourself if you've got an idea, and I can add that to the survey question that I'll post in a little bit. Or if you want to kind of type something in the chat, any way you want.
I kind of want to take a step back as we talked about the intent of these meetings and what we plan on moving forward. I find the information share extremely valuable, and I agree with a lot of the things that have been discussed to date as far as maybe we don't need a round robin every time. But when we start talking about ad hoc committees, I think about the other boards and committees that I'm on, and I have hesitation to how much time I can commit towards this group quarterly or monthly or whatever that looks like moving forward. So while I love this proposed project list, I don't know how much time I could personally commit moving forward. And that's where I think I'm kind of torn on the A, B, and other options.
Thank you.
So
That's such a good point. Yeah.
I'm hesitant to add to the list because I don't want to give a bunch of ideas and then disappear. So that's kind of just thinking out loud.
Katie, I agree, because I'm already in arrears to this group, because I know I have some emails I haven't been able to answer on some drought terms. So if you're like, oh, I'm on this committee, but I will definitely always be at these meetings to at least hear and listen and whatever, and until maybe we get some more time and can do extra work.
Yeah, and I get so excited and energized being with this group of people and talking about all these amazing things that we could do, but I also want to deliver a quality product, and it's hard to get people to show up no matter how excited they are when there's a time commitment of 3 hours or 5 hours or whatever that looks like in this amount of time. So I want to create a list. I want it to be realistic, but I do love the list.
Thank you. And I think that that's such a good point. And I'm sorry that we didn't kind of ask that question even before this, of just kind of asking how people's kind of time is allocated or over allocated at this point, and maybe even just like a quantity of these types of projects, if we want to move towards that, of like, if we're just picking just one kind of project to work on, and certainly those ad hoc committees will be entirely voluntary. And just by being a member of this group, I think the expectation, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to get at too, is that we want to put some formal structure in here to kind of create that, but we don't want to over formalize it, because we don't want to put that kind of pressure on anyone. So just by being a member of this group does not mean that, you're expected to necessarily, join one of those ad hoc committees. I think this is really just kind of, I think at this point, more of a sharing to kind of fill out that list and then maybe select one, and really populate whatever committee, or if it's the group as a whole, and we just want to spend time in one of these meetings to really kind of flesh out what that work product could really be. So yeah, really appreciate that. And I do not want to at all overload anyone additionally on top of everyone probably already being overloaded as it is. So yeah, I guess maybe, with that, maybe we could just focus on just like choosing one and kind of move forward with that. So, okay, so Francie just added a great comment. So regional discussion on how to talk to the community about the impacts of climate change and how it impacts water supply. Yeah, I think that's a great kind of discussion to have, and kind of like that information sharing. And I guess I should also kind of take a step back to that the format of these meetings are going to be pretty fluid, I would say. So, some meetings will be more focused on those communications, and then, or like third party presentations and kind of sharing resources, things like that. And then other meetings might be a little bit more heavily skewed towards kind of project work, things like that. So yeah, so Francie, thank you for that comment. Let's see. So Katie Schwab said, could do one topic at a time with the whole group, over 1 to 3 meetings, however long it takes, and don't see a need for subgroups. Great. I like that. That's great feedback. And yeah, so that's a great kind of maybe deviation to kind of consider is, should we even have any like ad hoc subcommittees or subgroups or anything like that? Or should we really, if and when we decide and kind of choose like a kind of a project to move forward with, would you rather work on it as a whole group over 1 to 3 meetings, or form more of a informal kind of ad hoc subcommittee?
I feel like it would depend. Like, I think normally we could do it so that it's like, I like the over 1 to 3 meetings and not having subgroups, kind of similar to what Katie was mentioning in terms of time commitment. But there, I think, also be situations that we'll need to pull together a ad hoc committee because we need to pull together some regional joint drought messaging or other messaging really quickly. it could benefit from a subgroup.
Great. So I think maybe the consensus is kind of, well, it depends on the project.
Let's see if the project kind of defines itself, and
Mhm.
in order to continue down this path, we need this element created, and we just don't have the time as a group to do it. Who can help us take that on for the next meeting and come back and report, and then we can move on with the discussion as needed basis.
Yes. Okay, and Alyssa, this is exactly what I was hoping to kind of what I was getting at earlier when I said that maybe we could open up the possibility of like assisting any like message kind of creation or anything like that. So if you didn't see it, Alyssa Quinn said that Lily has loved creating new material with this group, and we do have 2 bill inserts coming your way as well, one that's more timely and one that is timeless. And I think moving forward, working together to create material would be fantastic. We would need to figure out funding if there are pieces that this group is specifically looking for, but can figure that out. Yeah, I mean, I think that this, it seemed, I hope that kind of filling out that survey for Lily and those drought materials was pretty helpful for Lily and Waterwise. And so really, like, if there's anything else, hopefully as a group that we can, you know, lend our individual you know, expertise to, I think that would be very beneficial, I think, to both of us. So yeah, does anybody else have any like further thoughts on kind of working with Lily, or maybe even other groups or anything like that to kind of collaborate?
Well, being on Colorado Waterwise and also seeing a handful of other people that are currently on it and that have been on the board in the past, Colorado Waterwise is here for everybody that's on this call and beyond. And as Alyssa said, just to echo her thoughts, we loved working on that project, even though it was specifically under Lily. It was amazing. That's why we exist, to create resources and to share them. So if there's an opportunity for this group to lean on and collaborate with Waterwise, let's continue that conversation, especially in recognizing that everyone on this call has limited capacity. And when we get off of it, we go back to our own jobs and can't necessarily focus on building new resources. So.
And to that point, I mean, Colorado Waterwise is focused more towards that messaging side of it. But if we need to discuss best practices or training, for example, then maybe somebody reach out to Rock Mountain Section 8 WWA's Conservation Committee, because they're a little more focused on that area. And then if we need more information on water availability, I don't interact that much with the American Water Resource Association. The Colorado chapter is. I'm trying not to make this a singularly aligned group, because we all have different needs, we have different representation here. I think we all bring different things to the table here as well.
Yeah, well put. All right. Any other kind of general comments or other ideas of other things that, you know, maybe we could work on, or any other ideas on kind of how to facilitate that work?
Early on in our discussion about this group, you know, one of the questions Jason and I were asking was, what do you need from us? What is it that, you know, again, what is your utility? What are you in your position? Because again, as I look at the screen, those under cameras on, and those are up, and, you know, don't under cameras on, I'm seeing people across their utilities, different positions. So where are your gaps? And it'd be great, maybe that's a survey we do between meetings, is a gap analysis here. Where do you need the help? So we can help parse this out and say, here's a topic and here's where we can bring in additional resources to help us facilitate that discussion. You know, here's another topic, we do the same thing exactly. So be thinking about what it is now that we're, you know, it's already It's almost 1st of August. We've almost missed summer completely. What is it that had, especially in the Front Range side, had we had severe drought circumstances, what is it we would have been missing in our plans? What would we be scrambling from? And then as we look forward to, to that larger message of dry is the new future, what do you need in place to help you with that? And one thing I threw into our discussion earlier on, and especially with Francie's comment, was elected officials sometimes become a challenge for us as well. And when we come down to terminology discussion, I guess I'd like to have a frank discussion about what terminology challenges do you have, especially in a community. Certain communities, there are certain words that are not commonly used. Climate change is still one that can be controversial in some communities. So do we have to find another way we talk about this conceptually and philosophically and not trigger a negative reaction among our supervisors, managers, and elected officials? So, again, these needs analysis, I think we need a better idea about where it is we're all coming from, what it is we want of this group, and how can this group most efficiently help you.
It's like, yeah, well, Greg, I completely agree with you. And I think that will probably be the first thing after this that we can kind of work on kind of developing that needs assessment. I think that's great. Tyler, I saw your hands up.
Hey everybody. Sorry I missed the first half of this meeting. In the political discussion, I totally agree with that, especially when triggering. Francie, I totally agree with your assessment there, especially when triggering drought messaging or drought stages, whether that be elevating just simply more conservation practices or simply going into restrictions. And one of the things I've learned in my experiences with elected officials, they're focused on, in a lot of ways, two things. One, the immediate political capital and risks simultaneously that they have during their current tenure. And then two, that legacy piece of how their legacy as an elected official will be remembered in the community. Those compete against one another when it comes to drought. They don't want to be the elected officials to trigger any additional drought stages and say thou shalt not XYZ in the immediate sense. However, I think in terms of those messaging, we can do a lot better job at the staff level, providing them with talking points of saying, hey, although this might cost some political capital in the short end, look at how much it can build your legacy in the future. Look at how much you're posturing your community to be resilient for the future, for years and decades to come, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on as on a staff level to say, hey, yeah, I totally agree with you. It's gonna cost some political capital on the front end, which isn't great for reelection or even all the emails and phone calls you might get on the front end, but here's the talking points that you can respond with to your constituents to say, hey, I'm doing this for the long, for the long haul here. I'm doing this for not the short term, but the foresight for the long haul. So.
Yeah, I really value that comment, and I kind of focused in kind of there at the end with the kind of creating the key talking points. I think is so incredibly important when we're talking not just kind of the individual kind of like the terms used, but kind of stringing those together to create those more the key talking points and kind of how to organize that. So any kind of, I just wanted to, for the sake of time, kind of want to move the conversation a little bit forward, and certainly don't want to stomp on any additional comments or anything like that. So before I kind of post the survey link here to get everybody's input, are there any kind of final comments? Great. All right, so I am going to just go ahead. I'm not going to share my screen just for the sake of time, to share kind of all the additional any of the additional comments or anything like that for this. So yeah, please do take a couple minutes just to fill out this survey. And this is kind of that original question of, what are some of those potential projects or work products or even just topics. And I'll go ahead and share the results of this kind of after this meeting, and just not to belabor the point, but it kind of gives us a good kind of jumping off point, I would say, for the needs assessment. And then the next question that I have is about kind of what speakers or what topics we should be kind of bringing in to learn more from. And I'll actually, I think we've kind of already had that conversation a little bit. So I think I'm just going to plug that link in once we're done with this current survey. And please do, add in new other ideas that you might have for potential kind of work products and things like that. And in the meantime, I think Francie already added one. So yeah, multi-language talking points as well. And do we have the resources to do that? So yeah, making sure they're culturally relevant talking points, not just direct translations. Absolutely, like understanding the vocabulary and the terminology that actually resonates with the communities that we're trying to target is so incredibly important. All right. So while everyone's wrapping up their responses, I'll give another couple 30 seconds to a minute, just because hopefully people are typing away more ideas and more suggestions.
Why people are I just wanted the climate change comment, just for other folks, if like maybe 4 or 5 years ago in Longmont, we weren't supposed to use the word climate change, and now we're getting in trouble for having not had specifically called out climate change. And so like, just as a heads up, if you're, if that ends up, that we definitely had like suddenly like, why aren't you working on climate change? And we just weren't calling it that because we couldn't call it that beforehand. So just something we saw in Longmont, and in case other communities are kind of also shifting values on that.
I'll echo that with Aurora, and we still have a couple elected officials. We have to be careful what we say around that, though it has to do more about the perception of causation rather than the impact. That's why I like, especially Diane's comment earlier on about aridification just becoming more arid. That's a given. We know it's getting hotter and drier. That we can show straight up. I don't think anybody can argue with that. So maybe we just, if you need to, and again, that's where you need to know your audience. We were 10 years ago actually prohibited from even using climate change in term. We had to call climate variability, which, okay, now you're getting into nuance.
Yeah, and it's fascinating too to kind of see what research is out there. The Water Research Foundation, I think it was, that did a survey, and they found that regardless of an individual's kind of perception of climate change, whether they are absolutely accepting of it or they're skeptical or just, flat out denying, they still want you to use the term climate change as long as it's kind of backed up by more scientific fact. Because, the ones that are accepting, or the people that are accepting climate change for what it is, get upset with you for not using the term climate change, and those that are skeptical get upset with you for kind of dancing around the issue and like maybe talking down to them or something like that. So it was really interesting, but again, the caveat was, as long as the conversation was kind of backed up with more like direct scientific information. And this was done maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that survey. So I wonder kind of how that shift with kind of the COVID situation, of even with kind of like the scientific
I'm curious, Darren, the demographics of who the survey targeted, because that just I think like that could maybe that approach really works with a certain demographic where scientific data really resonates, why there are other cultures that are more like joint community knowledge, and it might be a totally different way of approaching it. So I'm just like very curious if they looked at demographics of who they were interviewing when they did that survey about that, as well as kind of not just where they were in climate change, but kind of their cultural background and how things are discussed and what's valued as kind of like the most important form of knowledge.
Absolutely. I wish I knew that, like how they segmented that. Yes, thank you, Greg. Let's move forward to kind of to the next point here, and we can kind of table that discussion for kind of a future meeting. So kind of we've kind of discussed already before that we don't want to eliminate kind of the ability to share resources, information, and still be able to kind of partner with other organizations like the Rocky Mountain section of AWWA, and just kind of bringing other third parties in to kind of communicate around issues that are important to us. So this next poll question, I'm just going to go ahead and drop the poll question actually into into the chat, and go ahead and kind of fill it out at your leisure. And obviously, if there's kind of broader discussion that needs to happen, we can absolutely have that. I just feel like for the sake of time and the fact that we've kind of already kind of touched on this issue, but please do fill out that survey question out, and please do add additional ideas or speakers as well, kind of to this question. So the question being, what are some topics related to drought you would be interested in learning more about kind of through presentations? And luckily, this is a select all that apply question as well. And Dave, that's a great question. I think that's definitely something that we can use to maybe guide the conversation for that next meeting. Great. So I'm just gonna hold off and give everyone still a couple more minutes to fill out that survey. That's an unfortunate approach. Like Alyssa's comment about having a customer on a Nextdoor post say that he'll conserve when we stop selling taps. It's a little combative. But I see Brennan, your hand's up.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. I like that you had drought plan development resources and guidance up there. I feel like if our intention for this group is to focus on drought rather than just general water conservation, I think one of the best things that we can do as water providers to prepare during this kind of quote unquote off season for drought, other than effective communications plan and managing demand, would be to make sure that we all have an updated and comprehensive drought plan. I can only speak for Broomfield on this, but ours was developed 10 or so years ago, and it's done the job up until now. But I think we'd really benefit from seeing where other water providers are at on their drought plans, and kind of hearing a discussion for lessons learned going through that process and challenges faced along the way. And kind of how some of those mitigation actions and response actions were developed.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. I mean, I think that there's so many, especially kind of some of the smaller providers, the more assistance we can provide or that can be provided to them, I think the better for all of us. All right, so it looks like I think we got pretty much everybody to participate in that poll. So the next, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right to the poll question, but we can certainly open up for broader conversation here. So I just shared the next kind of that next survey. So this is really kind of more about kind of how often we should hold these meetings, kind of to the point earlier about just maybe being a little bit overwhelmed and not necessarily having all the time in the world to commit to this meeting. So just kind of talking about, how often should these be held? So the choices I have in there are monthly, every month and a half, every other month, or more of a quarterly basis. So if anyone feels really strongly about kind of anything like this, would love to hear your opinion. If you wanted to put it in the comment section or just talk about it. But otherwise, if you wanted to just go ahead and fill out the survey, that's also totally acceptable. Yeah, Francie.
I responded with quarterly, but then realized that mine is very dependent on how long the meetings are. I rather meet more often for an hour and a half than quarterly for like 3 hours. I'm also part of the the land and water use nexus, and they do quarterly 3 hours, and I can never commit to that. It's just like I'd rather meet more often for a shorter meeting than like quarterly for like a half day meeting.
That is a great question, or a great point, and that's actually a perfect segue into the next question, which is how long should these meetings be? So maybe I should have put those two questions kind of together, so you're kind of thinking about those in tandem, kind of like Francie was already. But yeah, I think that's a really important kind of consideration. It's like, more frequent, but only an hour and a half, or less frequent and longer meetings. Oh, and Katie made another really good point. But yeah, reducing frequency during the colder months makes sense. Maybe where it's more of a kind of a time to reflect and kind of plan kind of more internally. And so maybe that could be every other month or so. So we'll take a look at the kind of at the responses and kind of build a game plan kind of based on that.
Let me offer a short counter to that, because that may also be the time we want to be watching snowpack and planning for next year. Sometimes that's a downtime when we can be more project specific because we have time to implement them. Not that I've discovered there is a seasonality to what we do anymore, but it seems to be a couple more minutes of time available, at least in December, than there are in July. So. Gee, Ruth, I didn't think we were brutal, but okay.
Oh, I think that was a reference to the Colorado land and
okay.
water use.
I hope so.
Yeah, they're like 3 hour long meetings. They're very long.
Yeah. No one should ever hold a 3 hour meeting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Katie, that is a great hashtag. All right, so like I mentioned earlier, the next question is really just how long should the meetings be? So I just added that to the chat. So go ahead and take a second to kind of fill that in, and then we can kind of move along to a couple of the other questions. Excellent. Well, so far it looks like everyone said either an hour or hour and a half. And then I think the duration, that's pretty evenly split. So I think we can kind of digest that moving forward and kind of figure out a good game plan moving along. So another question that we haven't necessarily kind of touched on, and I'm kind of moving into more of like administrative considerations. So I know we've talked a little bit more about kind of the function and the format of the group, but just in terms of like kind of the admin day-to-day kind of housekeeping stuff. So as I previously mentioned, I'm going to be assuming Jason's role for the admin and kind of the organization and kind of driving it, pushing it forward, kind of from the organizational standpoint. But we're also wondering if there were any volunteers to kind of join like a facilitation group or like help kind of facilitate these conversations. I'm sure you don't all just want to kind of see me blab from meeting to meeting. And we'd love to get a little bit more kind of diversity in kind of who is doing the facilitation and kind of like who's the face of each individual meeting. And that would also kind of help me kind of on the admin side to kind of track some things and kind of take notes and everything like that. So just based on time, if there's anyone that's really gung-ho and like really wants to kind of help facilitate, it's really just kind of guiding the conversation. It's not necessarily any really intensive time commitment by any means. But it would really just be kind of, maybe even just a conversation within a meeting. It would be great to kind of have additional faces kind of joining in on the facilitation piece. So yeah, so are there any volunteers or anyone that's raring to kind of join in on that front? Don't everyone speak at once? All right, well, if no one's brave enough to to volunteer right now. Oh, excellent, Katie. Yes.
And Diane as well.
And Diane, thank you.
Excellent. Thank
Perfect. That's good, Katie, because I think that we were going to volunteer you on your behalf. But excellent. Thank you so much. I'll definitely be in touch with at least Katie in the short term in the near future to kind of get that kind of set up. So moving right along. This one is just more of another kind of housekeeping issue. So right now, I think a lot of you probably already know, we have we store a lot of the information that we collect or distribute and share in this group. We store that on the state drought response Google Drive folder right now. And I just put a link into the chat right now. So if you're not aware of that, that's where kind of all the documents that we create and that we have here live. But I guess really kind of the question there is everyone, so this is a public folder that anyone has access to if they can get into kind of that state drought response folder. And I guess really the question is, should we keep kind of moving forward with this same storage solution, or should we kind of take on our own kind of file storage solution, whether that's making our own Google Drive that would be private here, or maybe even like working with another partner. And we do, so that is another great point, Francie, that we do have teams for this. So, but I guess that would be a larger question of how many people actually use Teams kind of within their organization and is comfortable with that. Are there other file storage solutions that everyone would be comfortable with? And are we comfortable with there being more of a public folder, or do we want more of a kind of a private folder that we are in control of.
Mhm. Now, while we use Teams as kind of our virtual platform, we don't have a Teams. We're not set up as a team in Teams, and I wish they'd come up with a better name. But effectively, it's a SharePoint-based system. And so that requires a little bit of administration. So we could set it up, but that does require that we have basically an owner of it. The advantage of, say, a Google site is that there really is an owner. You can have multiple administrators across multiple utilities, not be managed by a single utility. Now, I know there are also challenges with certain, especially in the municipality side, with IT departments and their restrictions on cloud-based solutions. So, you know, I don't want to exclude anybody. That's the biggest thing, nor do I want to place an administrative burden on anybody. No preferences? Does anybody have a platform they absolutely cannot use or not permitted to use? You know, early on, Aurora was told we couldn't use Zoom. That makes it very difficult in this world. So. And then it came down to we can't host Zoom, but we can use it. So.
And if there aren't any kind of strong preferences one way or the other, kind of right off the bat, you know, like we said, we're probably going to kind of create more of like a needs assessment to kind of suss out exactly what would be most beneficial to everyone. So we can always add in kind of this conversation or this topic to that needs assessment, to that survey.
It's like future discussion.
Yeah. Okay. And then kind of the last question I just wanted to kind of pose to the group. It was similar kind of to that file storage, but it's about kind of communication. Is there a specific tool? Say we want to have those kind of communications or updates or anything kind of in between the two meetings. Would it be more appropriate to just kind of continue with what we have been doing, just kind of sharing it over emails? Or, you know, should we focus more on a simple or a single kind of communication tool like Teams? I guess I don't know if it would be possible to set up a team. And then there could also, so like it could be Teams, it could be Slack, AOL Instant Messenger. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. But just like any ideas or suggestions, and kind of to Greg's earlier question, are there any platforms that you're just not allowed to use, period? Yeah, no strong opinions, not a problem at all. That will be another question we can add in kind of to that needs assessment. Great. Well, I think that is kind of all of the, yeah, that was all the real questions that I had to kind of guide that discussion. So I really appreciate all of the input and everything and all of kind of the thought that you all put into this. I think we got a lot of great information to really kind of move forward with maybe redeveloping kind of that purpose statement, of course, and then putting together and really populating the meeting agenda items so that from here on out, we're really trying to maximize that value and really create more of, you know, an intentional space to share resources and really kind of move this message, the collaboration forward. So kind of as per usual, so I know that I'll follow up with kind of sharing the chat dialogue, as well as kind of the meeting, the participant list. I'll also share that needs assessment once we create it. And then I will also, just like Jason was doing, sending that doodle poll to get a good idea for kind of when that next meeting is. I'll also go ahead and share the results of all of those polls just so we can kind of get a feel for kind of where everyone is. where everyone's at. So we're kind of on the same page with where we move forward. And then I know we did not get the chance to kind of talk about that consistent or that kind of recommended glossary of terms, but clearly based on the survey results and this discussion, I think that that will be something that we'll probably want to kind of just decide on and kind of move forward with. So yeah, we can end a couple minutes early, but if there are any other comments, anything that we missed, anyone or anything that someone's just been dying to say and just didn't really feel like they had the opportunity to say, like, you know, the floor is yours. Great, excellent. Well, sounds like everyone said everything they wanted to.
We solved all the problems, yes.
Exactly.
Well, we'll hang around, at least I'll hang around for a couple minutes afterwards. You guys want to have what Brandy Honeycutt calls the hallway conversations afterwards. I'll turn off the recording, by the way, so they can be frank discussions as well. So, and Frank, yes, you can have a frank discussion. So, okay.
Great. Excellent. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you.